The cabin erupted in chaos. A hijacker pressed a weapon to a hostage's ribs, freezing every soul on board. Passengers cried out, flight attendants shook, and terror gripped the air. Yet one woman remained different. Aria Dorne sat in perfect stillness, her breathing controlled, her gaze sharp, calculating. Then in a single heartbeat she moved, swift, precise, unstoppable. The hijacker hit the floor and gasps rippled through the cabin. For the first time, the fear shifted, not toward the masked men, but toward the quiet passenger everyone had overlooked. Who was she? And how could one silent figure change the fate of hundreds? Her next move didn't just save a plane, it shook the world. Captain Daniel Reeve had flown for more than 3 decades, yet every departure carried the same weight as his very first. He moved through the pre-flight checklist with the calm precision of a man who knew that discipline kept hundreds of lives suspended safely between earth and sky. Each switch, each verification mattered. To most passengers, this ritual was invisible. To him, it was the quiet difference between order and chaos. Beside him sat First Officer Amira Solano, sharp and focused, her youthful energy balanced by years of disciplined training. Her voice carried a calm cadence, laced with the warmth of her Colombian heritage, as she coordinated with ground crew and monitored instruments. Between them flowed an unspoken rhythm, captain and co-pilot, seasoned and rising, executing a dance older than themselves. Outside the cockpit window, the late afternoon light glowed across the tarmac, hinting at a smooth Atlantic crossing. Meanwhile, passengers streamed onto Flight 783 bound for London Heathrow. They carried with them the small, ordinary dramas of travel. A businessman jabbed at his phone, trying to seal a deal before takeoff. A mother coaxed her restless children into seats with the promise of snacks and cartoons. An elderly couple whispered about the vacation that had been on their bucket list for decades. University students, full of energy, shuffled aboard with backpacks and tangled headphones. On the surface, it was the portrait of a routine long-haul flight. Unremarkable, almost forgettable. And then came Aria Dorne. She moved without drawing attention. Dressed simply in navy slacks and a gray sweater, she carried no jewelry, no oversized luggage, only a modest leather backpack that slid easily beneath her seat. Her hair, a soft shade of brown, was tied back in a practical ponytail. To the casual observer, she looked like any other professional returning from a business trip, perhaps even tired from too many connections. Most would not notice her twice. That, of course, was the point. Aria sat quietly, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. But beneath the appearance of calm, her eyes missed nothing. She scanned exits, gauged the cabin layout, noted the flight attendants' positions. Where others saw routine, she observed with an instinct honed by years of practice. Every movement, every small detail mattered. And then she saw them. They boarded separately. 4 men who appeared, at first glance, to share nothing. One wore a hoodie, another a blazer, another a plain t-shirt, and the last a worn leather jacket. They looked like strangers. They ranged in age from mid-20s to middle age. Their skin tones and accents differed, as though fate had scattered them together by chance. Yet Aria recognized the pattern instantly. The watches, identical models, concealed under cuffs, yet glimpsed in the shuffle of boarding. The posture, stiff, upright, too practiced to be casual. The way their eyes never met, yet always knew where the others were. The carry-ons, heavier than leisure bags, handled with guarded care. They weren't random. They were a unit. Aria shifted slightly in her seat, her breathing steady, her mind already mapping possibilities. Most passengers would dismiss the signs, jet lag, nerves, coincidence. But she knew better. Patterns like these had whispered to her before, in places far removed from the safety of civilian skies. Engines hummed as the aircraft pushed back. Captain Reeves' voice filled the cabin with practiced calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 783. Our expected flight time is 6 hours and 43 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts as we prepare for takeoff." The Dreamliner lifted smoothly through twilight, climbing past clouds, leaving behind the predictable world of terminals and tarmacs. Inside, dinner trays clinked, children settled into cartoons, conversations softened. To the casual eye, everything was normal. But not to Aria Dorne. From her seat in row 14, she sat perfectly composed, her gaze fixed not on the in-flight screen or the window view of fading daylight, but on the four men who thought themselves unnoticed. She measured their breathing, tracked their eyes, noted the way their shoulders tensed each time a flight attendant passed. And though no alarm had been sounded, though no weapon yet revealed, she already understood a truth no one else aboard could sense. This flight was different. The first 40 minutes of the flight passed in deceptive calm. Dinner trays clinked, cabin lights dimmed, and passengers sank into the rhythm of long-haul travel. Some drifted into half-sleep, others tapped through movie menus. A few whispered conversations carried softly above the hum of engines. It was ordinary, too ordinary for what was about to erupt. It began with a sharp command, barked in accented English, "Nobody move!" A tall man in a black jacket lunged from his seat near the mid-cabin, dragging a flight attendant forward with brutal force. His arm locked around her neck, and the metallic glint of a weapon pressed into her ribs froze the aisle in an instant. A second man vaulted from his seat near the galley, shouting for everyone to put their hands up. Within seconds, the remaining two stood as well, pulling objects from their carry-ons. Concealed weapons assembled with terrifying speed. The air fractured into chaos. A woman screamed, high-pitched and sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. Children wailed as their parents pulled them close. Passengers shrank into seats, trembling, some raising their hands in frantic obedience, others frozen with indecision. The narrow cabin magnified every sound. Cries, shouts, the barked threats of the hijackers, until the atmosphere became unbearable. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Reeves stiffened as warning lights flashed. The emergency signals from the cabin told him what he already knew from the muffled sounds reaching through the reinforced door: hijacking. His instincts screamed for action, but his training held steady. With a grim glance at First Officer Amira Solano, he reached for the transponder, punching in the 4-digit hijack code that would silently alert ground control. "Lockdown," he said simply. Amira nodded, sealing the cockpit with reinforced security bolts. The thick door clicked into place, impenetrable even under assault. Inside the sealed cockpit, protocol reigned: communicate with air traffic control, avoid escalation, maintain control of the aircraft. It was the only shield they had between order and disaster. Yet the cameras told a different story. From his monitor, Captain Reeve could see the forward cabin. 4 masked men moved with military efficiency, forcing passengers to their knees, confiscating phones, barking orders to keep heads down. Fear rippled like a contagion. Grown men trembling, mothers weeping, elderly passengers clutching one another in disbelief. But amid the chaos, one figure stood out: Aria Dorne, seat 14B. While those around her shuddered and cried, Aria remained unnervingly still. Her posture was straight, her breathing controlled. She did not cower, did not plead. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, moved methodically across the cabin, cataloging exits, weapons, positions. Captain Reeve narrowed his gaze at the monitor, unsettled. In 3 decades of flying, he had seen passengers scream, faint, even lash out in panic. But never had he seen a civilian sit with such unnatural calm in the jaws of terror. The hijackers barked instructions. Passengers were herded toward the rear of the cabin, forced to sit cross-legged with hands on their heads. Bags were rifled through, communication devices confiscated and smashed. One of the men paced the aisle with the confidence of command, Cale Draven, though his name was not yet known to those trapped on Flight 783. His voice was cold as steel as he promised death to anyone who resisted. A man in business attire tried to plead for reason. He was struck viciously across the face, collapsing to the floor. Gasps rippled, children sobbed louder. The message was clear: obedience meant survival, resistance meant execution. Through it all, Aria's gaze never wavered. She appeared almost detached, though her mind was anything but. Every movement of the hijackers was logged, every shift in their body language noted. The glint of sweat on one man's temple, the tremor in another's grip. All details filed away in the silent war she fought behind her eyes. Captain Reeve leaned closer to the monitor, unsettled by what he saw. "Amira, look at her." The co-pilot followed his gaze, her brow furrowed. "She's not afraid." "No," Reeve whispered. "She's calculating." Another crash from the cabin, phones dumped into a bag, a passenger shoved to the floor. Terror thickened in the recycled air. Some prayed audibly, others wept into their sleeves. The hijackers thrived on this fear, feeding on submission. But still, Aria remained unchanged. Then came the first moment that broke the illusion of passivity. As one hijacker marched down the aisle, checking identification and scanning faces, he stopped before Aria. "Passport," he barked. She moved slowly, deliberately, fumbling as though frightened. Her hands trembled convincingly as she pulled the document from her sweater pocket. To the watching captain, it looked real. Terror, hesitation, compliance. But a flicker in her eyes betrayed something else. Her fear was an act. Behind it lay precision, purpose. The hijacker, fooled, tossed her passport onto the seat and moved on. Aria's breathing steadied again, her gaze returning to its silent surveillance. To most, she was just another passenger trying to survive. To the cockpit cameras, she was something far more dangerous. The one person aboard not reacting like prey. Captain Reeve exhaled, unsettled but strangely hopeful. Whoever she was, Aria Dorne was no ordinary traveler. And in a cabin drowning in chaos, she alone seemed ready for what would come next. The atmosphere inside Flight 783 grew heavier with each passing minute. Fear clung to the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Passengers knelt in rigid silence, broken only by muffled sobs and the clipped commands of the hijackers. Children whimpered, parents tried to hush them with trembling hands, but there was no comfort to offer. Every glance toward the masked men carried the same thought. When will they pull the trigger? And then it happened. The leader, Kyle Draven, strode forward, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator choosing prey. He yanked a middle-aged woman from her seat, dragging her into the aisle with cruel force. The barrel of his weapon pressed against her temple, his voice sharp as a blade. "One more sound, one more movement, and she dies." The woman's scream shattered what little composure remained in the cabin. Her husband lunged forward but was kicked down savagely. Panic surged, cries echoing as passengers buried their heads between their knees. But not Aria Dorne. From seat 14B, she watched the unfolding scene with a gaze as steady as stone. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate settling not into fear, but into rhythm. She measured the distance between herself and Draven. 10 feet. She noted the angle of his arm, the tension in his grip, the position of the other three hijackers. She filed each fact like coordinates on a map. The hostage begged through tears, her body trembling in Draven's iron grasp. Time stretched. Every second he held the weapon to her head tightened the noose of terror. Passengers prayed, the cabin suffocating with helplessness. And then, Aria moved. It was so sudden, so fluid, that many didn't register it until it was already over. One heartbeat, she was sitting still, indistinguishable from the crowd. The next, she was a storm unleashed. Aria surged from her seat, her hands snapping up the nearest object, a half-empty water bottle left on her tray. With surgical precision, she hurled it at Draven's face. It wasn't the bottle that mattered, it was the distraction, the split second of disorientation. In the same motion, she closed the distance, twisting low and striking his wrist with brutal efficiency. The weapon discharged once, a deafening crack, the bullet slamming harmlessly into the overhead panel. Gasps erupted, screams pierced the cabin, but Aria was already moving. She slammed her palm into Draven's elbow, forcing the joint to lock, then pivoted behind him, her arm snaking around his throat. With the strength of leverage, not brute force, she wrenched him backward, dragging him off balance. His weapon clattered to the floor, skidding beneath a row of seats. Passengers froze, stunned by the impossible sight. A lone woman subduing the man who had held their lives in his hands only seconds earlier. Draven snarled, thrashing, but Aria's movements were clean, efficient, born of training far beyond civilian self-defense. She shifted her grip, using his own momentum to send him crashing to the floor. His body hit the carpet with a thud, air bursting from his lungs. She pressed her knee to his back, immobilizing him in a single decisive motion. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. And then the cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in disbelief. Gasps spread like fire. Some passengers covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered frantically. A child peeked from behind his mother's arms, eyes wide. The woman who had moments before faced execution stumbled away, clutching her chest, sobbing in relief. From the cockpit monitor, Captain Reeves stared, unable to believe what he'd just witnessed. His co-pilot, Amira, whispered the thought that hung in every mind. Who is she? Really? Aria didn't speak. She didn't bask in their stares. Her eyes moved immediately to the remaining three hijackers. One was frozen in shock, another scrambling for control, the third shouting threats no one fully heard over the pounding of their own hearts. She stood with lethal calm, her stance steady, her breathing even. The passengers looked at her differently now, not as one of them, but as something else entirely. A protector, a fighter, or something far more dangerous. Dreven groaned beneath her, fury blazing in his muffled curses. Aria pressed him harder into the floor, her voice finally cutting through the storm, low, commanding, unshaken. Stay down, or the next time you won't get back up. Or, the words chilled the hijackers as much as they reassured the passengers. Because in that instant, everyone understood. Aria Dorne was no ordinary traveler caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was something else. Someone trained, someone prepared, someone the world had overlooked until now. And whatever she truly was, her presence had just changed everything. The cabin pulsed with raw silence after Aria's strike. The hijacker leader, Cal Draven, lay pinned to the floor, his breath ragged, his pride shattered. His men shouted in confusion, weapons wavering as they tried to reassert control. But something had shifted. For the first time, fear was no longer theirs to wield. It belonged to her, the quiet passenger who had just dismantled their leader like he was nothing. Arya's gaze cut through the chaos, steady and unyielding. She pressed her knee harder into Draven's back, her voice low but sharp, every word a dagger. I know who you are, Cal Draven, and I know this isn't about one plane. His body stiffened beneath her, the mask of command faltering for the briefest second. The other hijackers froze too, their eyes flicking to their leader. They had been told this was a simple mission. They hadn't expected their secret to be spoken aloud by a stranger. Passengers glanced nervously between them, not fully understanding, but sensing something larger beneath the surface. Aria continued, her tone calm, clinical, the way a surgeon might narrate an incision. This is Phase 1. Vanguard doesn't waste time on symbolic gestures. They strike in sequences. Transportation, communication, infrastructure. Hit them all, confuse the response, maximize the damage. This flight was never the endgame. It's the opening move. Draven twisted under her grip, spitting words through clenched teeth. You know nothing about Vanguard. But his defiance rang hollow. Aria leaned closer, her lips near his ear. Budapest, Odessa, Caracas. Do those names sound familiar? Draven's eyes widened, a flicker of something dangerous breaking through. Recognition. She wasn't guessing. She knew. Gasps echoed among the passengers, though few understood the meaning. Captain Reeve, watching from the cockpit monitors, felt the weight in her words. He had never heard of Vanguard in his decades of flying, but the way Draven reacted told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't some ragtag group of radicals. This was bigger. Arya's voice dropped, almost intimate. Your sister, Nadia, the scorpion tattoo with the broken tail on her ankle. You were there when she had it inked in Odessa. You held her hand, told her she was stronger than the world. Draven froze. His breath caught in his throat, rage and fear colliding behind his eyes. That detail was buried, locked away, something no intelligence file could possibly hold. For a moment, the unshakable leader looked like a man stripped bare. How do you... His voice cracked. Aria's reply was merciless. Because I've been hunting Vanguard longer than you've been serving them. The remaining hijackers shifted uneasily. One muttered something sharp in another language. Doubt crept into their formation like rot. If their leader wasn't untouchable, if their mission wasn't what they'd been told, then what were they dying for? In the cockpit, Reeves' hand hovered over the comms. His co-pilot Amira looked at him with wide, questioning eyes. "Captain," she whispered, "what if she's telling the truth?" Reeve exhaled, the weight of 30 years pressing on him. His entire career had been built on procedure, protocols designed to contain chaos. But now procedure meant waiting for negotiators thousands of miles away. Time they might not have. Time Vanguard could use. His eyes stayed locked on the screen, on Aria Dorne, this woman who had been invisible until now. She spoke with the authority of someone who knew too much, someone embedded in shadows he had never touched. The choice tore at him. Follow the book, keep the cockpit sealed, let higher command dictate the outcome. Or take the risk, believe in the stranger who had already proven she was more than she appeared. Draven hissed, trying to gather back his strength. "She's lying. A ghost from nowhere. Don't listen." Arya cut him off, her tone like steel. "You think Vanguard values you? You're disposable. They'll kill you the second this plane lands. The safe airstrip they promised? It's a kill zone. Reinforcements aren't waiting for you, Kale. They're waiting to bury you." Her words struck harder than her blows. The flicker of doubt in Draven's eyes deepened, spreading like cracks in glass. He remembered details, the strange silence from his handlers, the vague promises, the way coordinates had been delivered without context. Pieces he had ignored now screamed betrayal. Passengers held their breath, sensing the unraveling. Arya straightened, her voice carrying to everyone. "This isn't about Flight 783. It's about something much larger. Frankfurt, Charles de Gaulle, Heathrow. By the time this plane lands, thousands could already be dead, unless we stop it here." Her declaration landed like thunder. Fear turned into shock, shock into anger. Even those who didn't understand military operations grasped one truth. This wasn't random. It was a war no one had known they were in. In the cockpit, Captain Reeve closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the decision was made. "Amira," he said quietly, "prepare contingency access." Her head snapped toward him. "Captain, if she's wrong, we lose one plane. If she's right, we lose 3 cities." His hand hovered over the controls, sweat prickling his temple. One path meant safety and obedience. The other meant gambling everything on a stranger named Aria Dorne. And for the first time in 30 years, Captain Daniel Reeve chose not to follow the book. The cabin of Flight 783 was suspended in a silence sharper than any scream. Passengers remained frozen, their eyes darting between the subdued leader on the floor and the calm, unshaken figure of Aria Dorne standing above him. The hijackers still held their weapons, but their grip faltered. The aura of control they had clung to was unraveling, thread by thread. Aria leaned slightly closer to Kale Draven, her voice steady but pitched low enough that every word still carried across the tense cabin. "Think, Kale, why were you chosen for this mission? Because you're loyal? Because you're strong? Or because you're expendable?" He growled, spitting through clenched teeth. "Lies! Vanguard doesn't betray its own." Arya tilted her head, eyes narrowing like a predator who had already calculated the endgame. "Then answer me this. Why send you to land at a deserted airstrip surrounded by hills? No infrastructure, no cover, no escape. You really think reinforcements are waiting? They're waiting, yes, but to kill you, to silence the one man who knows too much." Draven froze, his chest heaving. The words cut deeper than any strike. The other hijackers exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered under his breath, the doubt spreading like infection. Passengers leaned forward unconsciously, pulled into the invisible duel of wills. Even the sobbing children fell quiet, as though sensing that the outcome of this conversation meant life or death for everyone aboard. Arya pressed harder. "Budapest, Caracas, Odessa." Each time Vanguard promised loyalty, and each time the operatives who carried out the first phase disappeared. No graves, no names, just silence. You know this. You've read the reports that never made sense. The ghosts you never dared question. Kale's breathing quickened. His eyes darted, replaying memories he had buried. Orders given without context. Comrades who never returned. The hollow reassurances that their sacrifices served the cause. It had always gnawed at him, but hearing it aloud shattered his denial. Aria's voice softened. No longer a blade, but a scalpel. You think you're the hunter, Kale, but you're prey. They dangled your sister's memory, your loyalty, your rage, then set you up as bait. Vanguard doesn't care about your cause. They care about control. And when this plane lands, you die first. The hijacker leader's mask cracked. For the first time, true fear flashed across his face. Not of Aria, not of the passengers, but of the shadowy masters pulling his strings. His men noticed it too. Doubt became visible, like smoke curling through the air. One of them lowered his weapon slightly. Another shifted nervously, whispering, "What if she's right?" Aria seized the moment. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. She simply extended her hand toward Draven. "You have one chance. Surrender now. Not for me, not for them. For your family, for your sister's memory. Walk away breathing instead of dying for men who already wrote your obituary." The silence that followed was suffocating. Draven's fingers twitched. His weapon lay discarded nearby, but he didn't reach for it. His chest rose and fell, his pride collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Finally, with a shuddering exhale, he whispered, "If I surrender, they'll still find me." Arya's gaze held his, unwavering. "Not if I make sure they can't." It was the closest thing to a promise she would ever give. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Kale Draven lifted his hands, palms open. His men hesitated, caught between loyalty and survival. But when their leader bowed his head, the fight drained out of them too. One by one, weapons clattered onto the carpeted floor. A wave of relief surged through the passengers. Some sobbed openly. Others clasped hands, whispering prayers of gratitude. The air felt lighter, as though a crushing weight had finally lifted. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Reeve exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. He activated the secure line. "Control, this is Flight 783, situation contained. Request immediate diversion to nearest military facility." The response was swift. NATO command authorized landing at Naval Air Station Sigonella in Sicily. Reeve adjusted course, his hands steady, his voice calm over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. We are diverting to a secure location. You are safe." As the Dreamliner banked gently toward its new heading, Aria bound the hijackers with improvised restraints. Seatbelt extensions, electrical cords, anything she could find. Her movements were efficient, unshaken, her expression unreadable. Yet when she finally looked up, her eyes swept the cabin, meeting the stares of passengers who now saw her not as one of them, but as something entirely different. Protector, operative, ghost. And though not a word was spoken, a single question hung heavy in the air. Who was Aria Dorne, really? The Dreamliner touched down at Naval Air Station Sigonella under the cover of night. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the cabin shuddered with the force of deceleration. Relief washed over the passengers in a collective exhale, the kind of release that only comes after hours of terror. They had survived. Military vehicles surrounded the aircraft before it even taxied to a stop. Armed personnel boarded swiftly, securing the subdued hijackers with professional efficiency. Passengers were guided out row by row, wrapped in blankets, escorted toward waiting buses. To them, this was the end of the nightmare. But to Aria Dorne, it was something else entirely. She moved quietly, avoiding the center of attention. No grand farewell, no gratitude accepted. While others clung to loved ones or wept in exhausted relief, Aria slipped away into the blur of uniforms and emergency workers. By the time Captain Daniel Reeve and First Officer Amira Solano emerged from the cockpit, searching the crowd, she was gone. "Did you see her?" Amira whispered, scanning the floodlights. Reeve shook his head, his gut tightening. "She's not here." Neither of them knew if Aria had vanished into a waiting military convoy, melted into the shadows, or simply walked past unnoticed. But one truth was clear: she hadn't stayed to answer questions. Later that night, inside a secure debriefing room, government officials delivered their verdict. The passengers would be told a sanitized version of events. A mechanical issue diverted Flight 783 to Sigonella. A minor security incident had occurred, but thanks to the professionalism of the crew, everyone was safe. No mention of hijackers, no mention of Vanguard, and certainly no mention of the woman who had saved them all. Captain Reeve listened in silence, fists clenched under the table. He wanted to protest, to demand recognition for the truth. But when he looked into the eyes of the intelligence officers, he understood. Some stories weren't meant for headlines. Some stories were meant to disappear. 3 weeks later, in a quiet hotel room in Chicago, Reeve prepared for what he thought would be his final flight before retirement. As he flipped through his flight manual, a ritual older than his gray hair, he noticed something unusual. A small black USB drive had been slipped into the emergency procedures section. His pulse quickened. He remembered Aria. That evening, he inserted the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life with a heavily encrypted file, unlocked by a single passphrase, one provided discreetly by an envelope he had received weeks earlier from an unnamed contact. The file contained fragments, intercepted communications, photos of operatives, coordinates linked to airports across Europe, and a video. Aria appeared on the screen. Her hair was shorter now, dyed darker. She wore plain clothes, blending into whatever city she was hiding in. But her eyes, the same sharp, calculating eyes he had seen on the cabin cameras, were unmistakable. Captain Reeve, her voice was steady, calm, even grateful. When you chose to trust me, you saved more than your passengers. The intelligence gathered from Flight 783 prevented 3 coordinated attacks. 17 compromised officials have been identified across Europe and North America. The war Vanguard tried to ignite has been delayed. Because of you. The video ended with a single line that lingered like smoke. Some battles aren't fought in headlines. They're fought in silence. And in silence, we endure. The screen went black. Reeve sat motionless, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He realized then that Aria Dorne wasn't gone. She was still out there, fighting, watching, disappearing. An invisible guardian the world would never know. When chaos erupts, most people freeze. It is not weakness, but biology. Our brains overwhelmed by fear, searching instinctively for safety. Yet there are a few who react differently. Their breathing slows, their focus sharpens, and instead of being consumed by panic, they begin to calculate. These are the ones who transform terror into clarity. Psychologists call it stress inoculation, the result of experience, training, and exposure to danger until it no longer cripples the mind. Soldiers, intelligence officers, and first responders carry this ability. They are what the military calls quiet professionals. Individuals who do extraordinary things without ever seeking recognition. Their victories often go unseen, their sacrifices rarely told. Aria Dorne represents that archetype. She is fictional, yet she reflects real figures who walk among us in silence. History is filled with such hidden guardians, men and women who infiltrated enemy networks, diffused threats before they reached the headlines, or stood in moments of crisis and turned the tide without ever revealing their names. And here lies a truth worth honoring. Women have long carried roles in intelligence and special operations, often underestimated, often dismissed, but again and again proving themselves indispensable. Calm under fire, unseen in plain sight, they remind the world that courage has no gender and resilience wears many faces. Perhaps that is the lesson of Flight 783. Not every hero wears a uniform. Some carry backpacks instead of rifles, sit quietly in seat 14B, and vanish without applause. Yet when crisis demands it, they reveal what has always been there: unshakable resolve. Invisible guardians walk among us, ordinary faces hiding extraordinary courage. Stories like this remind us that courage often wears ordinary faces. In today's world, we may never sit on a hijacked plane, but we all face moments of crisis, moments that demand calm when others panic, resolve when others give up. Whether it's a parent guiding their family through hardship, a nurse holding steady in an overcrowded ER, or a quiet neighbor who steps in when no one else will, heroes still walk among us. For many Americans, especially our older generations, this truth resonates deeply. They know from experience that resilience, faith, and quiet action often shape history more than headlines. Aria Dorne's story is fictional, but the lesson is real. The invisible guardians in our lives might be sitting beside us every day. So let me ask you, do you believe such hidden heroes still exist in our modern world? Have you met someone who inspired you by their quiet strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, please consider subscribing, liking, and joining our community. Together, we keep these stories alive.